progressive movement was a movement from the 1890s to 1917. As the name suggests, this era sought to move away from the corruption and greed, often seen during the Gilded Age, when patronage and the desire to get the money often neglected urban workers and immigrants. The first idea of progressivism stemmed from the Grange movement, also known as the National Grange of the Order of the Patrons of Husbandry. It wasn't as patriarchal as its name suggests, because women and teens were allowed in this group as well. Basically, the Grange advocated for a coming together of farmers in order to address issues, such as the rail monopolies. This group mainly subsisted at the local level, and coexisted with the more persuasive farmers' alliance, which advocated against the influence of railroad monopolies, but held influence over a wider range, often mixing with unions and political parties to advocate their concerns. The Farmers' Alliance grew out of the disfavor because of the increasing resistance of the monopolies that boycotted the alliance, and thus the alliance grew into a national level, the Populist Party, or the People's Party, and nominated candidates to reach a wider audience to voice the party's concerns. And it grew even larger into a more progressive party that would expand to address social and democratic issues. Populists were mainly located in the rural farmlands, were usually poor, uneducated, too radical, and their campaign eventually failed. The progressivists were mainly located in cities where middle class, educated, followed the political mainstream and thus succeeded in their efforts. The main objectives of the Progressive Party were to move away from this laissez-faire that had enabled corruption to run amok, and to move towards increased government regulation. They also sought to limit the power and influence of political bosses, and to end the frightening and horrendous working conditions that also included child labor. We also see a little campaigning for the segregation and Jim Crow laws, yet racial issues would be largely ignored due to the true Americans fighting to address their own needs.
Your three wings. The three wings was a term coined by historians to simplify the many problems exposed by the muckrakers that were addressed during the progressive movement. The first wing is the social justice wing, and their goal is to simply improve and regulate working and living conditions.
Here, you see a tenement housing, which usually consisted of immigrant families living in a confined space that was usually dirty and unkept. We also have issues regarding democracy in which progressivists sought to limit corruption in politics and remove the power from political bosses and place it into the very hands of the lovable American citizens. This political cartoon illustrates the large influence trust held over the U.S. Senate, in which the wealthy trust owners often influence or bribe senators to address legislation in their favor. And then you have those large monopolies, namely the Steel Trust by Carnegie and the Oil Trust by Rockefeller. Here, the Standard Oil Company wreaks havoc throughout America as this octopus with 8 legs takes control of the capital, resources, and American citizens. And to combat these issues, muckrakers came out, exposing the facts about these trusts, yet they mainly intended to inform the American public of these issues, not provide any solutions to these problems. An example would be Jacob Riis, who wrote How the Other Half Lives, which describes the tenement life that immigrants were forced to live in. And you also have Ida B. Tarbell, who wrote History of the Standard Oil Company, which exposed the monopoly practices exercised by Standard Oil.
The J-U-N-G-L-E. It's like a jungle sometimes.
We have a super influential muckraker, Alton Sinclair, He wrote The Jungle, an important novel because Upton himself exposed the terrible rat-infested conditions of the meatpacking industries. He described the living and working conditions of immigrants as well as the descriptive horror of the meat that may contain some tasty rat feces. As the quote goes, he aimed for the heart, but instead hit the stomach. The novel led Theodore Roosevelt to send an investigation team to check the accuracy of this novel. And sure were they surprised that Theodore Roosevelt passed the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, which mandated the accurate labeling of drugs and food, and the act eventually led to the creation of the Food and Drug Administration, which would manage to practice this. And we also have the Meat Inspection Act, which provided that federal inspectors would inspect the meat that we served on your dinner plate. But not everything was so meaty.
Who's house? Say what? Runs house. Say what? Who's house? Say what?
This sexy old woman named Jane Addams established a Hull House that would provide educational, cultural, and social services to the poor and to the immigrants. Her innovative ideas soon established her as an important social worker who had created a movement that would spread throughout the nation. And then there's Robert Lafayette, Wisconsin senator, devised the Wisconsin idea, which advocated for the conservation of natural resources, the direct election of U.S. senators, also known as the 17th Amendment, and income taxes, which would later become the 16th Amendment. The Wisconsin idea also included 3 new ideas that would expand the influence of the average American voter. We have the recall, which allowed voters to remove elected representatives from office if such representative was convicted of fraud and corruption. We have the initiative, which allowed voters to petition for a new bill, and you have the referendum, which allowed voters to decide if that bill should be passed.
I'm out for presidents to represent me. I'm out for presidents to represent me.
Now, the main figurehead during the Progressive Era was Theodore Roosevelt, who reigned as Supreme President from 1901 to 1909. He was known for his involvement during the Spanish-American War and as McKinley's VP. Afterwards, he would become president after McKinley's assassination. During his presidency, Theodore Roosevelt was known for expanding power of the presidency because that's what people wanted. Here, you see Theodore Roosevelt with a big stick, showing off his big stick policy, which justified American intervention in the affairs of the other nations. And you also have a square deal. And like squares, his square deal sought to address 4 types of events during the Progressive Era. One of them was the United Mine Workers strike. Basically, these union workers called a strike to protest the decreasing wages and hours, and that they weren't recognized as a union. Mine owners refused to negotiate with them, and this caused Theodore Roosevelt to intervene and settle this dispute. In the end, Theodore Roosevelt defended the union's right to organize, although not all goals were met.
Scholars rock fresh, north by northwest.
There was also the Northern Securities Act of 1904, in which Theodore Roosevelt sought to bust the Northern Securities Company that had reigned supreme over the railroad monopoly in the Northwest. In the same year, the Supreme Court ordered this monopoly to dissolve, thus establishing Theodore Roosevelt as a trust buster.
I'm out for presidents to represent me. I'm out for presidents to represent me.
Even after Theodore Roosevelt, William H. Taft busted trusts, even more than Theodore Roosevelt himself. We also have Woodrow Wilson, which would establish new banking regulations. As I said before, the 16th Amendment was about income taxes, and the 17th Amendment was regarding the direct election of U.S. senators, which were both included from Lafayette's Wisconsin idea. Can't forget the alcohol. Everybody loved drinking, yet people called for temperance or decreased drinking. The Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League were two of the many groups that advocated for temperance, basically because it destroyed lives. In this image, we see the 9 steps of how alcoholism leads one man into a wreck, with his wife and child so sad, crying. And this crying led to the 18th Amendment, which banned the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol. Yet many people got around this amendment by illegal trade and mafia wars. Women were great organizers at temperance and also at suffrage. They suffered for suffrage, until Wisconsin was the first state to allow women the right to vote. And some women who liked this were Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Carrie Chapman Catt. Eventually, the 19th Amendment made women's suffrage legal at the national level, and then women became happy for now. And here's the end of this movement. The US would become entrenched in World War I in 1917, and people started to care less about social issues. Yet, the ideals of progressivism would still continue, especially during the Great Depression, and accomplishments will be seen years later.